Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for coming to hear my talk. Now, George Staw. I've been working in IT all my life, working life, over 30 years, and the focus of my work has always been providing useful data to my colleagues. I've always, to sit with one or more users to work out what information they need and work out how to provide it better, quicker, more reliably, has always given me a great deal of pleasure and motivates me very much. But recently, when I say recently, for the past few years, this task of delivering data to users is getting more and more difficult. There is, I think it's already been mentioned a couple of times, there is a growing gulf in enterprise data management. There's more and more data, but there's also more and more regulatory and business demands, and we just don't have the tools to navigate this new and difficult world. What I've noticed, talking to users, doing workshops, is that users are asking for data-centric IT. So a single, comprehensive set of standards and structures which make corporate data governance transparent and straightforward. The phrase I come across a lot is baked in. Users say, we want security baked in. We don't want to have to go to another system to find out if we're allowed to use this data. We don't want to have to go to another system to find if this data is still relevant. They want the data to be in the foreground. And it's my contention, and this is the subject of this talk, that the IT industry has absolutely no idea of how to provide this kind of structural, architectural solution, because fundamentally the IT industry still operates on the basis of the process paradigm. This is the approach to IT that it learned 50 years ago when it started creating the first computer programs, i.e. you identify a specific task and then you create a system to automate it. Back then it was called IPO, input, process, output. And we did things like payroll and stock control in factories and so on. And it is IT's belief in this approach, which I'm calling the great process fallacy. And if I may say so, the first keynote speech presentation this morning from IBM is a perfect example of that. Everything that Edward said he wanted to do, we all agree with, we all want it. But his basic approach is to define this huge, hang on, I wrote it down, the AI ladder. That's what IT is always doing. We're always coming up with these new artifacts, AI ladder, and then we define these big complex processes to achieve these artifacts. But that is not, in my opinion, a viable approach. So, first of all, a little bit of history. Where does a process paradigm come from? Well, it comes from the idea which is absolute, which, as defined by Alan Turing, which is absolutely at the heart of IT. It comes from the idea that any intellectual task can be automated as long as we can define it as a series of actions and decisions. And that means, and this is what Alan Turing realized a long time ago, that a computer can do anything, theoretically. Now that is a tremendously exciting idea, and it is that sense of the unlimited power of the computer which still fascinates us, excites particularly technologists, but which is one of the reasons why because we focus on that, we don't see the other factors. Now, years of successful automation, so all the automation that went on in the 70s, 80s, 90s, plus more recently the achievements of companies like Google and Facebook and Uber and so on, seem to prove that the process paradigm does work, that it provides the key to unlocking the power of technology. And in fact, so prevalent has that idea become, the process paradigm, so that in fact everything we do in IT almost is a process. The question we're always asking is how do we do this? How do we create an IE infrastructure? Because it's we only have this one idea, that if we define the process, we'll achieve the solution. So we talk about, for example, the digital transformation. That's a big, or we say we're on a journey, or agile. Agile is again the same idea, the idea that if you define something as a process, you'll get software development. But the problem is that because of its reliance on the process paradigm, IT has become a victim of its own success. Because IT has always assumed that this process-driven approach would always work, it never showed any interest in developing other strategies for delivering computing. And I say, as I said, I've worked in IT for a long time, and my focus has always been on data. And over the years, I've seen one data-related initiative after another being just rejected by IT. Most famous one, I think, is Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web. He came up with this idea for the semantic web, which was a kind of information infrastructure. No one showed any interest in that. Now, process-centric IT is, I think, subject to a number of systemic limitations, fundamental things that are going to prevent it working. One is scalability. Because there is a limit to what you can define as a process. And again, thinking back to the keynote this morning, the IBM, about delivering AI. I mean, ultimately, what we were presented there is a process, and it's been thought through very carefully structured. But I mean, it's just so complicated, endless stages and phases and deliverables. And I see that again and again. I see companies, clients coming up with these big, complex processes, how they're going to provide GDPR, how they're going to do BCBS 239, And it's obvious nobody has the faintest idea what's going on. Everybody agrees and say, yes, we've reached that stage, and they tick it off. But nobody, these things are just too the human mind cannot cope with more than a certain degree of complexity. Another problem with these ever more complex processes is a lack of control for the customer. So all these processes, again, I'm sorry to be picking out this morning's, but I think it's just a typical example. If IBM come to you and say, we want to do this process, you're totally dependent on them to tell you what to do. It's not a balanced marketplace. It's not a marketplace where customers have a say in what goes on. And the other problem with the process model is what I call displacement. There's this famous quote by Mark Twain, I think, "To a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail." Now, the trouble is that the IT industry is very good at coming up with processes. And if you go up there, you'll see endless, a whole set of different suggestions. Particular processes, ideas that will deliver particular artifacts. But what happens, in my experience, is that all these niche specialist processes become self-serving, in a sense, self-referential. So a company buys a product and it's going to create for them a data lake, or provide them with data lineage or data taxonomy. And a group of people go off into a room and they work there for 6 months or a year, and they produce a data model or a data lineage plan or whatever it is. And everybody says, oh, that's great. But is it really solving the fundamental problems you have with data? It becomes a thing in its own right. And you've produced it, but does it achieve anything? So those are some systemic issues with the process paradigm. Now I'd like to come back to my original question, why traditional IT cannot deliver data-centric computing. And the answer to that, I think there are two key parts. The first part is what's there on the single-minded focus on process prevents IT vendors, the IT industry, from understanding what data really is. Data is not the new oil. Data is not this stuff that you process and clean, and data is, first and foremost, above everything else, context. Every item of data is connected to countless other items, and the value of any single item of data comes from being able to identify and trace those connections. If I say 59, what does that's useless. But if I say, who said it, Einstein said it, in connection with this question at that time, that number, 59, becomes valuable. And what the process-centric approach of IT that fails to take account of the inherent structure of data means that all those connections are lost. So what you have is a bunch of data artifacts that have been, where the connection to the original sources have all been lost. And that's what you have. These are the data silos that we have in so many, or even just a single spreadsheet. That's the first part of my answer to the main question. Now, the second part is perhaps a little more controversial. Okay, why traditional IT cannot deliver data-centric computing. The problem with these ever more complex processes is they prevent IT workers and users from doing what they should be doing, which is thinking, questioning, discussing, communicating. Every process has its own logic, its own timetable, its own schedule. And if you're going to use, and as I said, as they get more complex, what I've noticed, and the advantage of working in IT for a long time, is that people communicate less and less because they're following the process. They're doing agile. We can't stop and discuss that now. We've got to meet, the weekly, agile goals or whatever. And so the result of this is that IT as an industry does not know how to change. I mean, this is sorry, pardon my language. This is a bloody big irony. IT is always telling you, we're at the forefront of change and all this, but in fact, it's exactly the opposite. It doesn't know how to change. It's stuck in the mindset it had 50, 60 years ago, and it doesn't even realize that. Okay, so some of the reasons for that happening. There is this pressure to stick to the process. It's difficult to ask questions, and also just you're going to if you say, are we doing this the right way, you're going to slow everything down. This is the complexity of many processes creates individual uncertainty. I think if you go into a lot of IT departments, project teams, people are struggling with these complex processes, complex tools, and everybody there is thinking, I don't know if I'm doing this right, and people are scared to ask what seems like an obvious question. They're scared of showing themselves to be stupid. So you have a team of people who all think they're following the process. None of them really understand it, but it's like the emperor's new clothes. Everybody's a bit too afraid to admit what they don't know. And this is, IT providers never learn from experience. And again, this is part of the belief in technology and progress. And what's the point of trying to work out what went wrong in the last project? We were using different technology or an older version, and now we've got agile, and that was waterfall, but now we've got agile. We don't have to worry. The process is going to solve our problems. So there's never any sense, and as I said, I've worked in IT for a long time. I've never been in a situation where people sit down and say, what did we do wrong in that last project? What mistakes are we making? And the other really big problem with the process paradigm is it makes it possible to ignore mistakes. Because when you're talking about we're on a journey, digital transformation, AI, and it's going to be completed sometime next year or in 2 years' time, you don't have to worry about things going wrong now, because that's only to be explained. It's a pothole in the road. And that idea that one day we're going to wake up and everything's going to be fine is really dangerous in terms of preventing communication. As I said, these factors, they prevent IT, people who work in IT thinking and operating in in a normal way, being critical, questioning. And this is an email I got a few days ago from Oracle. You know, and when I looked at it, I thought, what the hell is going on? I mean, I could have received this email any time in the past 40 years, because it exemplifies perfectly this attitude of, you know, we're working hard, and any minute now we're going to break through just over the hill, just around the corner. Everything's going to be great. Just trust us. Right. So, that is kind of basically it. I'd just like to say one more thing that occurred to me this morning, so I haven't got a slide for it. The thing about data-centric computing is it requires a completely different mindset. If you really want to do data-centric computing, and really you should, because process-centric is not going to help you. It's just going to create more trouble, more tech debt for you. If you want to create data-centric computing, the hardest thing is changing the way you're thinking. At the moment, if you like, IT puts the cart before the horse. It takes a little bit of time to get used to turning that around. But once you start on that journey of creating data-centric computing, what you find is that everybody is empowered much more. Now, one of the key issues that came up in the earlier presentations is, you know, lack of skills, lack of AI, and so on. But the best way to think about that is like the difference between the telegraph and the telephone. Now, for many years, telegraph lines existed between cities, and to operate a telegraph, you needed a specialist at one end and a specialist at the other. There was very limited information you could communicate. And then along came the telephone. Kind of basically the same technology, a wire between two places, electric wire. But of course, everybody can use a telephone. You don't need specialists. Everybody, we can't all do Morse code, but we can all talk, and we can all listen. And if you move to a data-centric model, that's what you're moving to. You're moving to a situation where data is in the foreground, technology is in the background, so everybody can get involved in thinking about data, because in case anybody's forgotten, that's what human beings do. The human being is, first and foremost, an information processing entity. I mean, that is why we live in the world we do. That is why human beings dominate. Because for centuries, for millennia, we've been exchanging information with each other. We know how to use information. And what we need to do really is to get away from the telegraph world and move to the telephone world. We provide everyone with the tools, understand what it means to be data-centric, provide and start building up that understanding and the tool set and so on. And it actually is much, much easier than doing big technology type projects. That's it. So 5 minutes left. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Awesome. Sorry. Well, I have a microphone here if you have any questions. Anybody from IBM, Oracle? There you go.
Hi. Why should a company invest in master data management and those kind of governance, in your opinion?
It's not the tools themselves.
Oh, no.
You know, you still need.
If we take away the tools, why should a company do that?
You should do that for the same reason that why should we agree that we're going to talk English? We talk English because we want to share information with each other, and and human beings have found out that the key to a language is agreeing on what things mean. So I call that a table, and when I use the word table, you know what I'm referring to. And that's all ultimately that master data management is. It's the fact that without it, we can't communicate. But I mean, as I said, I'm not saying we shouldn't use MDM and data governance and all these other things, but they should be used in the context of a data-centric framework or platform or architecture.
Anybody else? Over here. The microphone is good for the recording as well, so there you go.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for your input here. It's good to know that that we are not alone in this. But you pointed problems towards IT, but I see definitely also big challenges in bringing business closer to become data-centric. Do you have any answers to that?
Yes. Again, it comes back to it's doing what people would do naturally. Yeah. Put together a team of people and give them a job to do, and they will. There's a quote by Steve Jobs. He says, "Technology is nothing. What I do, you've got to trust people, put them together, give them some tools, and they'll do amazing things." And that's how it should be with IT. You should say to people, okay, there's a bunch of data out there. Some of it's internal, some of it's external. Here are some tools. Work out what you want to do with it.
Okay, we'll do the very last question, I think, if you were done. Sorry. We have one here, and I think that's about the last question. We'll see how we go.
When I hear you talking about data, I think it sounds very much like you talk about common concepts to refer to concepts in the same way. And at the same time, companies tend to sometimes be very large, include many people, and if you just let them do whatever they want to, and don't make them organize themselves around these concepts and unite them somehow, how do you find that they, how can they work with data in that manner that it all connects?
Part of the data-centric approach means that you have to separate the conceptual data from the physical data. Okay, so if we take the example New York, right? Everybody here knows what New York is. Now, and we all think of it in different ways, and New York as an item of data, physical data, is stored in millions of databases and Excel spreadsheets and whatever, web pages. But there's still only one New York. And it's that conceptual layer that provides the key to linking everything else.
You talk about connection points.
Sorry?
Connection points, like, is that what you're
Yes,
to?
yeah.
Common
but basically,
concepts.
you define the concept. So if you're a sandwich bar, you sandwiches, and then you define all the sandwiches you make, and they change over time. But they're still the sandwich. That's your concept. That doesn't change. And by having that conceptual view, you have a framework that is good today and that will work in 50 years' time if you're still making sandwiches. And that's another key thing. We've got to future-proof our data. And the key to future-proofing our data, again, is this data-centric framework. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.